All right, welcome to part two of our Election 2024 takeaway series. This is a joint discussion that we put together between a number of entities. My good friends here with me. I'm Charles Ellison, publisher of the bnote.com, having this conversation with Trinity Lincoln Park Strategies and also Jay Wallen and Associates. Joining me now for this conversation. You did see part one. We appreciate you joining us for that, and I know everyone's been looking forward to part two. And to my left is Stefan Hankin, who is founder and strategist for Lincoln Park Strategies, go to lpstrategies.com, also founder of Trinity.com. Check out results and research there at Trinity.com. And further to the left, to my left, is Justin Wallen, who is founder, president, CEO of Jay Wallen and Company. Go to jwallen.com for more there. Good to see you, gentlemen, as we go through these through this holiday season, and quite an eventful one it is. There's a lot going on here domestically and also abroad geopolitically, right? Just a lot of uncertainty that's happening out there. So, on that point, Stefan, I'll start with you. Like what's standing out for you, because it's just a lot of tension and a lot of uncertainty in the air right now. Not just about the new incoming administration, but also what's happening abroad, whether it's in the Middle East and Ukraine. Like, what's standing out? What's keeping you up and keeping you up from sleep a little bit at night?
Can I say everything? I mean, definitely a big level of uncertainty. I mean, and what was happening, I'll say, in the lead up to the U.S. election, and is continuing on, is what we're seeing around the globe is, for the most part, it's a rejection of the party in power. Right? We talked a little bit about this on the last episode, where we saw the Conservatives getting kicked out of office in the UK, and then we're seeing more. Let's see. I mean, it just happens to be it's who's in power, but in Japan, they the center right party lost seats. We saw the same thing with Modi in India. We're seeing elections in Romania and Hungary happening, and Poland was more recent, and then in Iceland. Just recently, they kicked out a center right and moved more left. Obviously, in the U.S., moving more to the conservative side. So the pattern seems to just be more. Who's ever in office is not going to be in office. Now that doesn't count or factor in what we're seeing in Syria, which is clearly less about elections and left-right dynamics. But now we have, that Assad is now out of the country. In Russia, the rebels, I guess, I'm sure there's a better term for the group, are now in charge, and we'll sort of see how
insurgents.
Insurgents,
right.
So, but like obviously that's creating even more interesting dynamic of what's going on in the Middle East. So, we're transitioning to a new president on January 20th, and it's not going to be a calm, easy period for anyone to come into office. And if past this prologue, January 20th is good. It's just going to be an interesting time, and it's not going to be stable. Stable is not going to be the word that I think we're going to be using moving forward, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that, Stefan. Stable, just one of those words that just won't be in the lexicon much. Well, at least for the foreseeable months. Now, I want to get thoughts from you, Justin, about what's standing out. Are we seeing this strong shift to the right, or is it just, as Stefan was saying, just if you happen to be in office, if you happen to be in power at a particular point in time, you're just going to be unpopular. You should just expect to get pushed out.
Yeah, I think it's largely that. I mean, I don't see a global shift to the right, and again, on this past election was very much 50-50 here in the United States. So it's not as if the United States is now a supermajority center right, and the pendulum has really turned. It's changed in terms of the levers of power, no question about that. But in terms of whether the country is divided, the country is divided. You walk outside your front door and throw a brick, you're 50% likely to hit someone who voted for Trump as you are likely to hit someone who voted for Harris. And that's just the way it is. Now, globally, there are some interesting ramifications to all this tumult that's going on. Stefan mentioned Romania, which is always an interesting entity in and of itself. Those elections in Romania, I believe, are being thrown out because of what is being stated as Russian interference, which is a remarkable thing to have happen. Romanian politics is unique. So, but that's truly remarkable. And meanwhile, with Ukraine, we have an increasing focus on kind of Russia's last credible display of their extension of power, right? I mean, that's the big story. Second from regime change in Syria is that Russia's proxy power stature has been damaged almost irrevocably. I mean, the first component was actually simply in Ukraine, not just being pushed back, but by seeing Russian arms and training being shown to be desperately ineffective in today's battle environment. And now we have those assets, those geographic and political assets being devastated within the Arab Peninsula, which was key towards Russia's expansive efforts. So the world is really changing. Side note, my big question is I think most of ours is with Syria, is not, is Syria going to become a free and democratic Syria? The Arab world doesn't really work that way. But is Syria going to be self-contained, or is it, let's go create the new caliphate? And obviously, we're all concerned about the second. Whether it's an imperfect new regime that keeps to itself, that might be the best thing for all of us.
Right. Which is, I'm assuming, top of mind for the Israelis as they're moving into the demilitarized zone and inch by inch taking over pieces of Syria. So they're worried about what comes next in terms of that regime change. But let's go domestically now. Let's talk about that election that just we all can't seem to stop talking about. That's the U.S. election 2024, and there's a lot more election discussion there. We're getting like final vote counts in terms of the popular vote. Clearly Donald Trump won the Electoral College decisively, but Kamala Harris picking up over 48%, 48.26% of the popular vote. Trump just 49.86%. This was very, very slim distance between these two. Not really in terms of the popular vote. Trump getting that mandate that he's constantly saying he got, and he's really irked by that statement or by that implication from a lot of media outlets, a lot of journalists, commentators who are saying, folks like us who are saying that, hey, you know what? As far as the popular vote, you really didn't get that mandate like you thought you did. What's that tell us about the polling? What's that tell us about the overall electorate? Stefan, going back to you.
Yeah, I mean, to Justin's point earlier, right? Not that I'm advocating throwing bricks at anyone, but apparently, if we're going with that analogy, if you throw a brick out of your door, you're an equal chance that you're going to hit a Trump or a Harris voter. Obviously, but not obviously, but like most of us live in areas that tend to be more monolithic in its thinking and just the self-sorting of how we are. But in the broadest sense, it's a divided country, right? It has been for a while. It's going to be divided for the foreseeable future. And pulling in a sports analogy, because why not, right? Like, if you hit the buzzer beater in a game of basketball, right, you win by 1 point. Like, you're the champion, you get to raise the trophy, but it's not like you are an infinitely better team, right? And so it's the same thing for the Trump coming into the White House. This is not a mandate. This is not a earth-shattering win. Yes, like significant on the Electoral College side, but that's I think the latest count is about like 160,000 votes difference would have swung the Electoral College to Harris, right? So not like millions and millions of vote difference. The popular vote's going to be, I think, the closest since 2000s, where Al Gore won the popular vote, but then obviously not to bring up bad memories for Democrats, but then Florida put it in the column for George W. Bush. And so this is, I think, the second or third closest results over the last 100 years. So certainly not anything I would put in a mandate. He won. He's going to be in office, and that's what we're moving forward with.
Yeah, and Justin, if folks are obviously going to say, especially on the Republican side, well, that doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, Donald Trump, he got the most electoral college votes. Democrats can continue to eat on sour grapes.
Yeah, it does matter. Maybe not for the next 18 months, but it certainly matters in the midterms. The nation is divided, and it is true that when you win, you win. It really, in terms of the effect of the presidency, you got it. So it doesn't matter really whether it's short or whether it's long, in terms of the gap. But and it becomes a diminishing importance when you also control the Senate, and even though it's very narrow, in the House, right? So the ability to affect change and affect your agenda really is in your wheelhouse, and it's yours to lose. But you're both very, very much right. I couldn't agree with you more that that's a practical mandate in the short term. What we have is we have a divided nation in terms of opinion. It's very, very close between the two candidates. And if legislative direction and presidential direction doesn't affect key components of what they ran on and deliver, even if people don't agree with them, by the way, then it's going to be deeply, deeply vulnerable come the midterms. So we'll see how that pans out. It is not a time to be arrogant. There's a difference between emerging, victorious and emerging with hubris. And we'll see how far that goes in this coming administration. But they clearly have the ability to affect meaningful change, align with the platform that they ran on within the first 18 months or so.
Yeah, I want to talk about this further. Stefan, I want to go back to you and Justin. Come back to something that you just said a moment ago about the nation being more divided. Can we look at that a little bit more deeper and explore that point? I was reading the Washington Post lately, and there was this piece by Nicholas Stephanopoulos at Harvard Law. He was saying that that an unnoticed theme in this election was depolarization, that we weren't really as polarized as we thought we were. Quoting him, the electoral chasms between groups of voters shrank compared with 4 years earlier. And he's looking at AP Vocast, where, for example, the share of Black voters supporting Trump increased from 8% in 2020 to 16% in 2024. And the fraction of Latino vote share rose from 35 to 43%. And the white vote remained very stable. So, and it seemed like, you had these at one time very divergent groups seeming to align more, even though very substantially Black voters still bent and went toward Democrats, toward Kamala Harris, but still double their vote share for Trump in 2024. So, is it really all that polarized, all that divided as we think it is? Or, is there some kind of new realignment that's going on? I'll start with you, Stefan.
I'll say interesting take. I don't buy it. I wish it was true, but just because, in general, look, there are a lot of problems facing the country, our world. Moving together and more people working together is ultimately what we should be going for, but I don't really foresee that happening over the next couple of years. But I think, I think this is one of those cases where it's so the argument holds based on the numbers, right? Yes, groups moved more towards the Republicans, and then arguably that's shrinking differences. But I would generally say, and what I'm seeing in the data and what we're hearing from people in, qualitative, focus groups, one-on-one interviews and things like that, is that, we are a very divided nation, right? And if you look at the people who are voting, Democratic or Republican up and down the ballot. That's over 90% of voters, and what we saw more seemingly happening this year is people voting for Trump, but not voting for anyone else. Not, oh, I voted for Trump and I voted for the Democratic senator, or I voted for Harris and the Republican senator, or another form. Not to say it didn't happen, but we're talking real small numbers. So I'm in the category of like, I wish it were true, but I don't really see that being the lesson in the data.
Yeah. You think so, Justin? Wishful thinking there?
Yeah, I think it's wishful thinking. I think those moves were largely pragmatic. There's some recent kind of qualitative research that was done by a mutual friend of ours, folks over at Mercury Analytics, that went in and asked people who voted for either candidate why you voted for that candidate and why you think people voted for the other candidate, which I think is a really unique approach. And this wasn't thousands and thousands of people, but it was a couple hundred people, and it's qualitative, so you're able to capture what they said and then categorize that. And I think it's telling that folks who voted for Trump said kind of what you'd expect. I voted for Trump because of the economy. That was the biggest thing. And then you have immigration there. Well, but you kind of just saw the track along what you would see in the quantitative polling that was prior to the election. And then you ask people who voted for Harris, and the biggest reason that people who voted for Harris thought that people who voted for Trump was racism and bigotry, which is a profound statement. And I think it reflects the efficacy of the messaging of the past 4 years about who Trump is and about who support, about what the people who support Trump are. And I don't think it's true. I certainly don't see it in the research that I do, that people who have voted for Trump, whether joyfully or reluctantly, are, even a plurality or even a significant chunk in a meaningful way, racist or sexist or so forth. Those weren't the issues that drove the election. I think it's sad that we see that, and I suspect there's a significant chunk of on the opposite direction. Why people feel that folks who voted for Trump feel people voted for Harris. That to me is what drives that polarizing.
Let me ask you real quick, Justin. We can move on from that. But could people be, definitely those voters, not feeling or not seeming, not really being or exercising any type of racism or bias or prejudice, but unknowingly voting for a person.
Yeah, I don't buy that.
Or builds racist policies.
I understand that I'm going against the construct of a lot of very bright people that feel that that this is a key driving factor amongst human beings and Americans in particular. However, I don't see that come through in qualitative research. We as researchers have the good fortune of actually not just asking people, standardized test questions, right? Things that are kind of choose 1, 2, or 3. We get to talk to people. And when you talk to people, you get to see a lot of good, bad, and ugly. And we do see some ugly, right? These things do come up because it's a part of society. People are tribal the world over. Europe still has a problem with the Jews. These things exist, and they're challenging. And same in America. There is racism in America, and it is ugly, but it is by no means a deciding factor that I have ever found in any political contest. It's in fact, racism in America continues to, in my research and my interaction with people, I see an ongoing trend line of going downwards and downwards and downwards, which is a good thing. But again, I do not believe that is a decisive factor, and even in a close aspect of our political realm.
Yeah, and just to chime in, and we could spend like multiple hours talking just on this topic alone, right? But in general, agreeing with what Justin's saying, in that like racism absolutely exists, right? And there are policies that will have a clear effect that is different for Black Americans, Hispanic Americans versus white Americans. Now, but when you throw around the label of racist, as Democrats do a lot, right? It's a very broad brushstroke of, and of how people behave, what they're thinking, and it's also attaching lots of people onto a small minority, right? Like I would say the people who are overtly racist and publicly so are, it's a very small number, right? And then we say, okay, well, if that person associated with Trump, or if you feel Trump himself is saying very racist things, then everyone who votes for him is racist, is not really getting you to the goal that you ultimately want to get to. So I think Democrats have to be more careful about how they're throwing the labels around, and understanding that racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, there's a range, right? And lots of people think in terms of racism as, hey, like, I'm not putting on a white hood and burning crosses, therefore I'm not racist. And like, yes, there's a lot of space inside of that into like you're supporting policies that are going to adversely affect certain communities, but labeling people who are supporting what people that arguably are bad policies does not make those people racist per se. And we just need to be careful about how we're talking about that and placing motivations. And the reverse is it's like the welfare queens from the 80s and early 90s, right? Like, could you find one person who bought lobster or steak with their food stamp card? I'm sure there was a case of that happening somewhere, right? But that does not then therefore mean that like all Black people who are on welfare are eating steak and lobster, right? So I mean, this is sort of a feature, not a bug of our political system of just, hey, I found this one example, and therefore the entire other side is that person. If we can start moving away from those broad brushstrokes, I think it's going to be better for society in general, but certainly something that Democrats, speaking from the Democratic side, need to start thinking through about how we're talking about this, so we're not repelling people and attracting people to the ideas and the concepts of change.
And to that point, and moving on to another big topic, messaging, and obviously how that want to keep talking with you, Justin, about that point or this point as far as where Democrats go from here, where they go from here as far as this election. Obviously not the kind of election, not the kind of outcome that they wanted. They knew that they had the presidency. They knew that they had the House. Obviously, flipping the Senate, we're not flipping. Holding on to the Senate was just a hope, but there wasn't an expectation that the Senate would flip as much as it did. But where do Democrats go from here in terms of strategy and in terms of messaging? Stefan, I'll start with you, and then Justin.
I mean, definitely a lot of soul searching, right? And this has been the case for a while now, right? If you look at the data behind individual policies, right? Not all, but a lion's share of policies, people are in line or pretty close to where Democrats are on a lot of big policies, right? But we're still losing lots of elections, right? So if support for core principles is there, but you're not getting the votes, like clearly there's a disconnect, right? And I think for Democrats, it is a broad tent party. There are a lot of different factors and different factions that are sort of coming together under one umbrella, and that's a tough situation to be in that it's very hard to keep everyone happy, right? And it drives me nuts when Democrats are, we need to move more left, we need to move more center. It's like you're missing the entire point of why there are challenges, right? Like it's more like, okay, what's the common ground? What are we moving forward to as a uniform or like as a block? And then what are the pieces that are going to be more central to the various factions that come together? And I mean, there are examples around the country of where this can work well. Like we do a lot of work up in Maine. I think the Maine Democratic Party is exceptional at understanding that more liberal areas like Portland are going to react very differently than in the more rural areas that are more conservative, right? So I think the party has to do a big rethink of what this all means, and it's not like we just need to put this moderate face as the face of the party, and then problems are solved, or we need to put AOC out there as the face of the party. It's like we need different people out there talking about different things, and and last thing I'll do on just crapping on the party is like, look, the backbone of this party are Black women, and the party needs to do a better job of putting the voices more center, but also putting some of the issues more front and center. So it's like, look, if this group is carrying the water for the party, like we need to be doing more to support and help in those efforts. And I think that was lacking in this past election.
Conversely, where does the Republican Party go from here? Obviously, had a great year, right, Justin? But still there's some issues. There are going to be some fractions that are going to show up as we head to 2025. But so, what do Republicans do from here?
So the biggest thing that goes wrong after these elections, and Stefan hit it right on the head, and it's very human, is to say we need dramatic change on the face of the party that lost, or the candidate that lost. We got to make a big pivot because whatever we were doing wasn't right. So let's go really hard this way or really hard that way, and just change kind of our overall direction. Usually that's a bad idea. It's a bad idea with branding in business. It's a bad idea in politics. It doesn't really reflect why folks lost. There's a similar kind of desire on the side of the folks who are winning to say we've got a mandate for everything that we had on this plate, and we're going to move forward, and we're going to move forward hard, and we're going to move forward fast, and we can be confident that we're doing so with the full backing of our electorate. And neither of which are really true, right? And both of which betray a fundamental strategic mistake, which is a failure to continue listening and to listen harder. Because usually, sometimes you lose because of a whole lot of things that just happen that are outside of your control. But regardless, it behooves you as a winner and as a loser to put your ear to the ground a little bit more carefully after that momentous event, whether you lost or you won, and really make sure you're listening to the people who put you in power. And that's the Republicans on the Republican Party, the people who aren't Republicans who voted for Republicans, right? And that kind of vast chasm of in between. And usually that gets left in the background. That'll be outside of budget. It'll be it'll be left to leadership to make those decisions. And more often than not, they're reflexive. They're usually partially right, and they fail to capture key constituencies which you really need to capture. Just like Stefan was saying, I mean, it is time for the Democratic Party to really listen to Black women and find out why they didn't show up. Right? I mean, it would be step one, I would think. Same thing for the Republican Party. It was a close election. So why was it so close? Why wasn't it a landslide? That's the question I would be asking myself if I were in leadership on the GOP side, and
so
trying to
now
fill that gap.
I wonder,
rather
well,
than
Justin, continuing that conversation,
continuing on the victory lap internally.
Was it a party realignment going on, or was it just something that was Trump related, just a Trump phenomenon all on its own?
I think there's a larger phenomenon in American society right now that one term is populism. I think it's a little bit more distinct than that, and it's an anti-bigness-ism, if you will. Things that are big are not viewed favorably by the American public, and that's a blanket statement, but I think it's broadly accurate, and it extends beyond government. And I think there are a number of industries that are very vulnerable coming into the next 4 years because of that, whether that's big tech, whether that's certain components of healthcare. I think Americans, whether they are red, blue, or somewhere in the middle, are largely disaffected by large institutions, and whether they want to see them torn down or not is a different question, but they definitely do not feel that those institutions behave in their best interests, and they'd like to see that change. So maybe one way of looking at it is, what do these things do for me that further my and my family's agenda to have food on our table, drive a car that doesn't break down every week, have a home, be able to retire, be able to pay for my health care and not gradually die of disease in this rich country of ours. And those are the things that I think are driving this broad malaise that we have. It's I think it's less about party and more about what about every man, and which, by the way, is the theme of the Democratic Party. Everyman. This should be what the Democratic Party is winning on.
Mhm. Yeah, Stefan, go ahead. As
Yeah.
far as whether or not you think it's a Trump phenomenon.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, from the, I'll call it the Republican side, right? Like, if this was a realignment,
Yeah.
then how is it that Republicans lost the Senate races in Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, right? Like the only, right, Pennsylvania, I think, was the only truly like sort of toss up Senate race that the Republicans won. So like I'm not buying into this. Oh, this is a full realignment, right? And I think similar to what we saw with Hispanic voters in 2000. I think it was 2004, where Bush got, it was close to 50-50, something that pretty close to what we saw now. But 4 years later, Obama won 85%, something like that, right? So I don't see this as like, oh, all of a sudden, like all these Hispanic Latino voters are becoming conservative and Republicans. I think, for this election, yes. And then also, Trump barely got more votes than he did in 2020, right? So this was much more about people not showing up than it was who people voted for. So that's sort of my argument against the like, oh, this is a realignment or this is the, a huge victory for Republicans. Again, they won, they have control of all three, lost a seat or two in the House, but here we are. For the again on the Democratic side for this, to Justin's point, right? Like we've lost that ability to connect sort of that message for the everyman. And yeah, like you get it, right? Like it's hard out there for a lot of people. And I mean, what's frustrating from my end is like, look, this has been the argument that the party's been making for 100 years, and somehow we weren't able to connect the good economic numbers nationally with the fact that people are still struggling, right? So it's like, look, this is the proof is in the pudding for the Democratic message in that, the US economy is arguably the envy of the world. Lowest inflation rates, lowest unemployment, GDP growth, et cetera, right? All these stock markets way up, all these check boxes, right? But like lots of people are still struggling, and that should be a complete wheelhouse for the Democratic Party, and we failed completely to make that connection.
Yeah. I was just recently having a conversation about that out in New Orleans, moderating a panel discussion with state legislators, and was talking about the American Academy of Arts and Sciences just recently put out a report on from their Commission on the Reimagined Economy about the really broad disconnect between the indicators and the reality, the conditions on the ground. So, not really having the kind of essential conversation that's needed and planning around that as far as like what, and really considering what Americans are feeling broadly on the ground. Okay, the GDP might be doing well, but definitely my purse, my pocketbook, my bank account is not feeling that. I'm not feeling that as, in terms of my job prospects or the job that I'm currently in. Just not feeling that right now. And that's how does that look? Justin, what do you think about that? How does that look, especially when we're heading into 2025? I mean, the economy right now is still generally, once again, when you're looking at those macro indicators, the economy still looks strong. We don't know what things will turn up or how things will turn out in 2025. We all hope for the best, obviously. We want the economy to remain strong. It is the strongest on the planet right now. But what does this all look like? Obviously, I know you don't have an economic crystal ball in front of you, but say things go southward, downward as far as economic trends in 2025. How does this new administration prepare for that? How does it react to that or respond to that, especially given that disconnect between indicators and real impressions and conditions on the ground?
Yeah, the only thing that will matter in terms of Trump's strength and staying power is whether what you just mentioned changes, and that is, do most folks start to feel that their dollar goes further?
Yeah.
And that feeling has a lot of things in the basket, but what it comes down to is, are you getting kind of most of the stuff that you kind of want and need, not the pie in the sky stuff, but you kind of want and need, and do you have a little jingle left in your pocket at the after the end of the day? That is not what they have. They have compounding pressures, and it's very complex to affect that change. I suspect that a number of the kind of approaches and the cabinet choices that he's making may help that, because they tend to be business friendly from a small and medium business standpoint. I certainly hope so. But that's really what's gonna be the proof in the pudding. If he isn't able to affect that, there's no amount of strength of stock market, there's no amount of low unemployment that matters. It's kind of like the term peace, right? Peace is a meaningless term. People say, I want peace. Do you? Well, because Syria under Assad 15 years ago was peaceful. You just were murdered if you spoke up against it, the dictator. Yeah, but it was peaceful. Same thing for unemployment. Unemployment being low is a meaningless statement to people who work for a living. Unemployment has to be low, meaning, and I have to have a good job that has prospects, that pays for my family, that allows me to do those basic things that as American, I do have the right of expectation. Doesn't mean I have the right to it, but I have the right to expect it in the richest, most powerful country in the world. If I work hard, I should be able to get ahead a bit. Don't need a private island, but I should be able to get ahead a bit. That's what matters to Americans, and that's what has to be affected. If they fail, then you fail broadly, and the midterms will be a bloodbath.
Mm. Hey, Stefan, so economy is top of mind for voters, for all Americans, right? But this president, his administration, saying that their top priority day one will be mass deportations. So immigration is a top, but when we look once again at AP Vocast, once the votes were tallied, once they talked to the voters, exit polling, economy was the top issue at I think it was about 40%. I think immigration was right behind it by second at 20%. So most voters are thinking about, just like Justin said, economy is the most critical issue, but they're talking about mass deportations and immigration. How is that going to be reconciled when voters start saying that? And how will that be leveraging a political leveraging opportunity for Democrats once that starts happening?
I'm going to say it's not going to end well for the administration. And I mean, they say death and taxes are the two things you can count on in life. I'm going to add to the list that Republicans will read the tea leaves of what just happened on the win that they just got, and Democrats will underread the problems that they're facing. So it's pretty universal that this happens almost after every election. But so, if I was advising the Trump administration, not holding my breath for that phone call, but it would be look, you won, right? Do some small little thing. You can claim a victory on the deportation and then move on, focus on the economy. That's how you're going to keep the House and Senate in 2026, and how you're going to, JD Vance or whoever is going to be the heir apparent for Trump has a better chance in 2028. I also will bet lots of money that none of that will happen, and they're going to overstep on the deportation side. They're going to arguably fail pretty poorly on that, because I don't even understand the mechanism of how they would even remotely do what they say they want to do. And then same thing on the economy is they're over promising, and then also talk on improving the economy, and also cutting $2 trillion out of the federal budget with this Doge thing that Musk and Ramaswamy have going on, right? I think both will ultimately fail and put them in a very poor position for 2026. Now, whether Democrats can actually take advantage of that, not sure, and we'll see how that all plays out. But ultimately, they're not setting themselves up, from what I can see, for any kind of actual success. And if any, and it's more likely that this will fail and put them in a tougher position 2 years from now.
Mm-hmm. Hey, another thing too is I wonder about now. I want to talk about these cabinet appointments. Justin, you can't make this up. the quality of these cabinet appointments and the controversy surrounding them. We had one controversial pick, right? Matt Gaetz. He was up for Justice Department Attorney General, so he was pulled out. But we still have Fox a cable news commentator, up for running the most powerful military on the planet. Pete Hegseth. So he's still hanging on despite allegations of rampant alcoholism and rape. Uh, you've got other cabinet picks or selections, Tulsi Gabbard and others. Uh, she's up for director of national intelligence. There's accusations that she has close ties to Vladimir Putin and others. So they're all carrying all sorts of very problematic baggage with them. So I mean, can the Senate realistically uh, confirm these picks? I mean, will they? What are you thinking is going to happen with this?
Well, I think we've already seen, pushback from Republican senators that tanks Matt Getz's effort. Right, he is no longer the pick there. But he's going to be a commentator on OANN, right? And there is pushback going on right now. It is that dance, that courtship to see if there can be a nuptial. And that's just the way it goes. Republican senators will vote the way they feel that they will be protected at the ballot box ultimately. So they need to balance voting for someone they feel is the right person for the job, with also not wanting to be targeted in a political fashion by the administration, which has been done to effect in the past. So I actually see these things in a somewhat different light. I think that they are an interesting shell game. And I think that the future president, the president-elect, is doing a fairly good job of, one, he wants to goose the system, and he does want to offend people who have, offended him, Justice Department, being in mind here. But more than that, he is doing a pretty good job of saying, look at this shiny metal object. And a lot of people are really looking at those shiny metal objects. Meanwhile, you have some appointments that are profound. The new chair of the SEC, Paul Atkins, right? This is someone who is going to introduce some pretty meaningful reforms into at least one industry that has been under attack from day one during the Biden administration. Now, whether you agree with that industry or not, this is someone who is widely respected by both sides, widely respected from the industry from which he comes, and is a sober choice. And there's a lot of those sober choices throughout these cabinet picks that are not getting the news, and I think they're not getting the news for exactly that reason. We have a shiny metal object here. We're all doing a great job of running after that shiny metal object and continuing to show, shed light on it. And ultimately, that decision will be made by the Senate, and the Senate tends to be pretty cautious about these sorts of things. That will work out in the wash. Meanwhile, you have some remarkably, I think, effective potential appointees that can introduce regulation in fairly short order that will transform certain industries that do have some promise. So I may be wrong, but that's the way I read this.
Yeah, go ahead, Stefan. I want to get your thoughts on that. And meanwhile, we've got billionaire Elon Musk. He's in the background. Mind you, I always have to point out. I mean, this is a guy who he's got like 3 passports on him. He's got South African, Canadian, and U.S. And he's inserting himself in very bold ways into American elections now. He wants to be a permanent player in American politics, and so he's in the background promising political retribution against both Republicans and Democrats who push back against Trump. And I guess that's going to start with this cabinet confirmation process. But what do you think is going to happen here, Stefan, and how the Democrats respond and react to all of that?
Yeah, I mean, presumably, Democrats should be pretty united on the no side for a lot of these, the more controversial picks, to be sure, right? And agree with Justin on the sense that, like, look, there are a good number of appointments that I might not necessarily agree with, but like, look, you won the election, you get to put the people in place. They are eminently qualified to do this, whether I agree with their positions or not. Like, that's sort of the bar in my mind when it comes to cabinet picks. Now you got the big ones that we were just talking about, like Department of Defense. You have RFK Jr. in Health and Human Services. You have Tulsi Gabbard, and I'm sure I'm forgetting someone else that is like woefully unqualified. But with Hegseth in at Department of Defense, right? I mean, personal issues aside, like, I see no qualifications for this person other than, he was in the military and thank you for your service, but that doesn't qualify, just because you worked at a McDonald's doesn't mean
Yeah.
you are qualified to be the CEO of McDonald's, right? Like there is a skill set involved in running the largest military force in the world. And I fail to see how he has it. So, and I think, for the controversial ones, it's going to be very interesting to see what the Republican senators do. I mean, I'm assuming on the less controversial ones, like that's going to be sort of just pretty pro forma, get them in. But definitely keeping an eye on Department of Defense, what they do with RFK Jr. and with Tulsi Gabbard, and I'm going to say they're probably about like 48, 49 given votes on anything that Trump does because they just don't want to deal with any kind of pushback or, fully agree with the approach. But then you have 3, 4, maybe 5 Republican senators that are more the wild cards. So they're going to be interesting to watch. And then, the thing with Musk and Ramaswamy is, you're already seeing the look, here's a guy who has lots of vested interests in what the federal government does, between SpaceX and Tesla. And, and then you hear Ramaswamy was out the other day talking about questioning the loans given to Rivian, a competitor of Tesla. Right. So are we just fully running the crony capitalism right out of the White House and just giving Musk everything he wants and going after his competitors? And is that what his goal is? I mean, if I'm taking the full negative view, absolutely. But so that's what's also very concerning, and that's not a Senate confirmed thing, right? They just made this up, and then supposedly he's going to be there advising, but he clearly has the ear of Trump, at least for now.
Hey, speaking of that crony capitalism, Justin, the combined assets of Trump cabinet selections right now are worth $340 billion. That's nearly $500 billion. So obviously that's much more exorbitant than the combined assets of Biden cabinet members, right? And so, and the Biden cabinet also being, we didn't even get into the diversity of a Biden cabinet versus a Trump cabinet. Trump cabinet is just, there's been a lot of conversation around that about the woeful lack of diversity of Trump cabinet members. But what message is that sending when your cabinet selections are combined, their worth is nearly $500 billion? And once the general public starts to pick up on that, I mean, that looks like an oligarchy. That doesn't look like a government.
Well, sort of, right? How does it look to the American public? That's what matters. Not what it looks like in the Beltway. You know what it looks like to the American voter? It looks like success, right? I want a piece of that. Those are successful people, and he's surrounding himself with successful people economically. Now, you can parse that through a little bit. Is someone self-made or dad give it to him, all these kinds of things. But the reality is money is an attractive thing in American society. And I don't personally think that's a terrible thing, but my opinion doesn't mean anything. Americans tend to like it, except when it has the impression of creating an uneven landscape. And what you began the conversation with a little bit earlier in terms of Elon Musk, I think carries weight. And there's a very big risk there within the administration of having an impression to the American people that suddenly there is the creation or enhancement of an uneven landscape. And what you don't want to do is say, well, everything that we're doing is making us get richer and you stay where you are. I think there's a remarkable degree of elasticity here with the American voting public. And again, I think with, not a huge amount, but about 50% that say, y'all can do what you want as long as my life is getting demonstrably better. So if you get rich and I get better along with you, I'm happy with this and I'm comfortable with it and I can sleep well at night. I don't think there's a reflexive, I hate a billionaire atmosphere that's pervasive amongst a majority of American voters.
Yeah, go ahead, Stefan.
No, I mean, completely agree with that, right? And I think this is, again, the failure of messaging, right? Where Democrats come across as being against success. And I don't think that's actually true, but that is how it comes across, right? Like, oh, we hate billionaires just because they're billionaires. It's like, no, like, let's celebrate that success for most folks. But it's like, look, good for you, right? Like, you created a company, you made $1 bazillion, you're successful. That is awesome. But that is different than, hey, do you still need these tax breaks and these government subsidies and giveaways and things like that? Like, it's a different conversation. Is a different framing of the message, right? Like, you don't want to be on the side of like being against success. You want to be on the side of making as many people as successful as possible. And Democrats don't do a very good job of connecting that. And and I completely agree with Justin, right? Like, how much someone is worth or how much the cabinet is worth that is solid, liberal enclave fodder for discussion. But like, for most people, like, that does not bother me. I do not care. I just assume most politicians are probably rich anyways. A lot of them are, but like, that's not affecting my day-to-day life. So again, if I was in the Democratic Party and they were listening, it'd be like, look, forget about the net worth of the cabinet, right? Like, focus on these individuals who are woefully unqualified for this, and connect of how that, putting in friends and buddies, and and just people who are bootlicking, and that's why they get the job, of like how that's going to affect people's day-to-day life. Because what I'm sure most people have experienced is someone getting a job that they were not qualified for because they were really good at kissing the boss's ass. And that's what you want to sort of present this as, not going after the fact that there's some big bank accounts there, but like, look at these people who are getting these important jobs just because they've sucked up the trouble.
So that pretty much wraps up our discussion here, our part 2 takeaway of election 2024. We've been having some great analysis, some great insights, thoughts from my friends here, Stefan Hankin and Justin Wallen. So giving me some more food for thought, and I can't wait to have some more discussions in this continuing series. We'll obviously continue this as we head into 2025 into January. There's going to be a lot there. Obviously, we've got everything from Senate confirmations to the implementation of new policies promised by the, I'm real curious, as I know you two are, about mass deportations being promised at the top of the year. Also the erection of this new agency, right? DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. I want to see how that's going to work out. Especially federal government is the largest employer in the country. So let's see how that's going to work out, and a number of other things as well. And also, watching for those aspects of this that are not so obvious. Looking at those things that are not the shiny objects, right? Like as you were saying, Justin, earlier. So I want to thank Stefan Hankin, Lincoln Park Strategies, and lpstrategies.com, also Trinity.com for more information, and Justin Wallen, jwallen.com for more there. I'm Charles Ellison. I've been your host. For this hour. You can go to thebnote.com and subscribe there for more information on what I'm doing. Also, want to thank I always getting support from the Civic Literacy and Media Influence Institute for helping support these discussions that I participate in. CLMI is at learnforlife.org for more there. So always want to get the young people involved and participating in these discussions and learning more about what's happening in American politics and public policy. So we will see you next time. Thanks again. Take care.